these days, every company is a data company, right?
Mm,
Every
Hmm.
company runs on data. Every
mm,
company has data. There's two different models. One is a very centralized data team, and the other is a very decentralized one where there are analysts, for example, like a marketing analyst, a sales analyst, a product analyst, right? That are really more focused on different pieces of the business. A marketing leader should really think about who's their analyst and how embedded is that analyst in their team to
mm.
understand what their goals are. Because an analyst can go on a fishing expedition, go digging really deep, but not find things that will actually move the needle.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Sarah Krasnik Bedell, Director of Growth Marketing at Prefect. Sarah studied math and cognitive science before completing a master's in data science, and she started her career at Amstead, working on data aggregation and machine learning models, and eventually moved to a customer-centric role where she helped engineering data architecture for supply chain optimizations. She had short stints in financial forecasting and then company-wide data architecture. She then joined Perpay as a data engineer focused on product analytics as well as reverse ETL for their marketing team. She was eventually promoted to lead data eng, managing the full team of data engineers. She's also an analytics and GTM advisor for DevTools, and today she's director of growth marketing at Prefect, a workflow orchestration tool for data and ML engineers. Sarah, thanks so much for your time today. Really pumped to chat.
It's awesome to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
This episode was brought to you by our friends at Census. You probably have over 15 tools in your marketing tech stack, but how many of them have the full picture of your customer's journey? Census acts as the universal data layer in your stack. It unifies and cleans data from all your sources and makes it available for any app and AI agent to use. Census makes it super easy to unify and standardize customer data, then enrich and enhance it, like running deduplication, cleaning, scoring, and routing workflows, and then sync and activate that data across all of your tools so you can actually do something with it. As a former customer and power user myself, I honestly wish I had discovered Census way earlier in my career. For marketers and data teams that work together to power big campaigns, it's so refreshing and actually possible to work from a reliable source of truth. Don't just take my word for it though. Census is loved by marketing and data teams at awesome companies like HubSpot, Perplexity, Canva, Clay, Notion, Activision, and many more. Check them out at getcensus.com and tell them we sent you. I'm excited to chat with you as a data engineer turned marketer. We don't chat with a lot of folks that made that transition. I think a lot of marketers will agree that the relationship between engineering and marketing isn't always the greatest. I actually did a full episode last year unpacking why Martech is actually for engineers for a lot of folks, but that overlap is getting really blurry with Gen AI. But we also went super deep into like attribution. And so there's a bunch of topics that we could chat about here. But Daryl, I'll let you take the first question for Sarah.
Yeah, great to meet you, Sarah. And yeah, I'm really interested in the transition from engineering and data to marketing. And there's it seems to be a big jump. What how did you make that jump? Was it primarily self-taught, or did you go back to school? Did you take some boot camps or courses? Did you read books? Tell us about your journey there.
Absolutely. So when I got my master's in data science, I vowed to myself that that would be like my last formal education. I just knew that that was the furthest I wanted to go, is getting a master's. I was ready to learn on the job, and that's exactly what I did in this transition. But even going further back, right, in data engineering, a lot of the skills that I learned were also on the job. So even though I started, right, I took computer science classes during my undergrad, during my cognitive science degree. A lot of, I'm sure software engineers will say this as well, a lot of the computer science classes don't always match to like what exactly you're going to be doing day to day. And I certainly felt that, especially because there was no major for data engineering then,
Mm,
right? It was a certain flavor between data science and software engineering. So I kind of had that learning on the job experience and really enjoyed the practical application. So during my time leading the data engineering team at Perpay, one of my biggest projects was working with the marketing team and helping them onboard iterable as an email and SMS marketing platform. And as you can imagine, onboarding that type of platform means having customer data, all sorts of different analytics in the tool for audience segmentation, for personalization, for Perpay was an e-commerce platform, and so adding all the data about the products that we sell, and so that was actually a really big data engineering project. Through that, I learned a lot about what iterable could actually do and how marketing worked. Like that was really my first introduction to that, and honestly just found it very, very interesting. That was also the time during which I was kind of trying to explore what a path in my career could look like that wasn't tied to how well I could code. So with data engineering, similarly to software engineering, it's a lot about the code that you write and what you ship. And for me, I was much more interested in the output as opposed to the actual process. And that was kind of a learning for myself. And so for me, I just got as deep with the marketing team as I could, learning at Perpay, learning from them, and really trying to understand how everything worked mechanically, because that would allow me to understand how the output was possible and the impact of the output as well. Speaking to the actual transition, so this was all during COVID, and I'm sure plenty of us, had a lot of time, picked up a lot of hobbies. I'm gluten-free, and so I didn't bake bread because that would be a lot harder. And so what I did was I started writing.
Nice.
And so one of the first things that I did was just write about some of the data engineering work that I was doing. And that just people started reading it. People started saying this was helpful or that they liked it or appreciated it. And I just got more and more into that. And at some point, people started to pay me to write in the data space, and that kind of started to snowball. And I kind of got the pulse of, there's something here. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something here. So that kind of led me to leaving my full-time role and exploring consulting full-time. And so I did that. I had a few contracts that I set up right after I left Perpay in terms of data and analytics work, but then it gave me the time to also go deeper into writing and working with marketing teams at several different companies. And I think that exposure to several different companies really allowed me to see what it's like at different places as opposed to just being in one place. And so that's really how I landed at Prefect. And it was really more about knowing the product, knowing the people, and knowing kind of what that marketing motion looks like from the consumer, from the end user perspective, just because I know this space and I was previously in the position of being a potential buyer. Throughout my time at Prefect, there's been, again, a lot of learning on the job, just like there was when I first got into data engineering. And so I've really, really enjoyed that piece. That's supplemented by kind of some extracurricular things, right? I have several advisors that I speak to and learn from. I read a lot of newsletters and just read from people in the space about what the trends are. And of course, the Reforge community is unparalleled and has been really helpful in learning about the space as well.
Yeah, I wonder. I think that's interesting because, what I'm hearing is you're focusing more on you got more interested in the outputs and maybe the concepts versus like the actual technical coding, which to me probably is a good move, just with the rise in popularity of AI taking over a lot of the actual more menial programming tasks. And then secondly, it's probably paid off as well that you didn't start in marketing because, and I'd love to hear your take on this, so many of marketing best practices are just not good. They're just, someone came up with it and everyone follows, for some reason, just follows it, like send email 8 a.m. on Tuesday, everyone just sends it, and there's really no data to guide that. Is that your experience as well? Like, do you find that when you think about these like marketing concepts or like more business concepts, you're kind of like, oh, this is not really from first principles. Like, I have a better way of thinking about this. Do you think about it like that or not really?
Daryl, you're really speaking my language, because for me, I was just born a natural skeptic. Like, when everyone goes right, I kind of have a tendency to go left a little bit. And so I do that in marketing as well, where the way that I approach things is from a first principles standpoint, which is, what do we want? Let's take things in two different ways. The first is, what do we want the world to look like, and what is the ideal? And then, what is possible? And let's find a way and a happy medium between those two. And I think that's really how I approach growth marketing as well. And I think that, right to your point about AI, I think there's in data engineering and in software engineering, I think there's just more of a stress now on architectural decisions, just like I think in marketing, there's more of a stress on strategic decisions of, who are we going to go after? How are we going to go after them? How are we going to engage them? And then, right, step two is like, okay, let's write the copy or something like that. Right. So I think it's similar in those ways, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that I question in marketing, and I'm sure for anyone who continues listening, which I hope you do, right, you'll hear that in some of my rhetoric a little bit.
What if you had to give advice to folks that are considering the opposite transition? Like, maybe not a full transition from marketing to data engineering, but what is like some of the advice that comes to mind for you for marketers that want to improve their data literacy? If you want to be like an analytics or a data leader, but still kind of in marketing, but be respected by data engineers, what skills you really need to know kind of at minimum, in your opinion?
The answer that I'll give is probably a little bit vague, but it's the most relevant, which is systems thinking. I
Okay.
think that applies a lot in Martech, but it's how does data roll through the system, and how are we going to architect the transfer of data through different systems, right? In Martech world, it might be from like signals from a lead into our email platform or CRM, into, right, the hands or context of reps reaching out, right? They're into maybe the warehouse to be able to run analytics on it. So there's a lot of areas of data transfer, and it's trying to think one level above in terms of how to architect that data transfer. And so that is at its core a data engineering problem. Just in the marketing world, right, there are more drag and drop tools, and in the data engineering world, you're probably going to go just like one layer deeper and closer to the actual code and the actual process. And that's really fundamentally the difference.
There's a lot of folks that are in data engineering, or maybe like engineering in general, that I don't know if like allergic is the right term, but they're kind of like allergic to marketing. There's like this disdain for marketing, maybe because it's chaotic, but also because like it's a bit dirtier. Like, we're selling stuff, and a lot of engineers want to build product, and they're excited about building features and improving the user experience. And not a lot of engineers make the transition you did to going up every morning and selling a product and like building a website and creating a way to get people to convert. Like, what advice do you have for data engineers that are maybe listening today, that like marketing isn't that bad of a transition? Like, why do people have in engineering this disdain for marketing, in your opinion?
I think engineers have a disdain for bad marketing,
Hmm.
and that's like 95% of marketing and touch points. And I think it's like one bad apple ruins the bunch, where if you have one bad touch point, or even just like two bad touch points out of maybe potentially 50 touch points from a company, you're going to categorize that whole company as having like in that kind of bad marketing camp. And I think that's what engineers are allergic to, and frankly, rightfully so. Right now, being in the space and getting under the hood and how these things work, like there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of different ways to approach marketing. And so my advice would really be to think about marketing as educational. I don't think of myself actually as selling, and I don't think of growth marketing and the team as selling. I think of us as trying to display the value that Prefect can provide to our audience and to potential users, and exposing that and making it as obvious to you as possible. And if it's not obvious, then we're not doing our job very well. And if it feels like spam, we're also not doing our job very well. And so that's really the way that I think about it. And so one of the reasons that I kind of moved into marketing was I felt that there was this opportunity to really change how marketing to developers worked, and really be part of that change, because I think it's evolved so much. It will continue to evolve. And so that, I think, is the opportunity at hand.
Yeah, I just had a thought like, so let's say you have your average marketing leader and, they didn't come up from data. But they want to start approaching things like attribution. They want to approach segmentation. They want to improve their reports. Like, do you think that it would probably be better for them to maybe hire a data analyst or data specialist as their partner or like right hand person, and then approach those? And like, if that is the answer, like bring someone on, what skills does that person need? And the reason I'm asking this is because, I think that there are some really critical data problems that, organizations need to solve. And if those types of data skills are lacking, you know, I think we would need to do something about that. We need to fill the gap somehow. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this really gets into how to sell the role of a data team internally, but also the structure of a data team. So there's kind of two different models. One is a very centralized data team, and the other is a very decentralized one, where there are analysts, for example, like a marketing analyst, a sales analyst, a product analyst, right, that are really more focused on different pieces of the business. And I kind of tend to lean on, right, so a marketing leader doesn't really care about the underlying data architecture. Like, they shouldn't care if, right, data pipelines run on, right, within AWS on like an EC2 instance or like something else. Like, that doesn't matter, right? And so I think that a marketing leader should really think about who's their analyst and how well do they understand the underlying data that they can dig through and grab insights. And then also, how embedded is that analyst in their team to understand what their goals are? Because an analyst can go on a fishing expedition, go digging really deep, but not find things that will actually move the needle. And so the way that I think about data is, what questions are you trying to answer? And a marketing leader will know that. What they won't know is, where do you go looking to answer those questions? And I think that is someone that is, a data analyst by trade and has exposure to that, is really into what data actually exists, is going to be able to kind of to pair those two. And I do think that, right, these days, every company is a data company, right? Every company runs on data. Every company has data. And we are at a point where if you're not using data to your competitive advantage, you either are already falling behind or will soon fall behind. And so I do think it's very critical to be very forward thinking in terms of how are we using data, not only to better our own decisions, but to understand our actions and how to create that pairing between the actual engineering with, here are the insights that are needed for my team, and here are the goals of marketing, whether it's, right, driving sales, whether it's driving engagement, or whatever it might be.
Such a good take there, Sarah. Like, every company is a data company. It's funny because like 10 years ago, I grew up in marketing where there wasn't even a data team. Like, we were fighting with the product team to get technical engineering support when it came to like APIs and hooking up different things or getting like a script on this site. And today, flash forward just like a couple of years later, most companies, especially in tech, like have a data team. And now we're sitting on a Martech podcast, and most of our audience is marketers. A lot of them are technical marketers, where we're talking about things like pipelines and data warehousing. And I know that you're deep in the process of building a warehouse first tech stack at Prefect. And maybe you can give us an overview of some of the tools that are making this possible for you. And I'd be really curious to hear like the decisions along the way that you had to make. And maybe you can start off actually with like, what do you think is the role of the data warehouse in Martech? It's like a three-part question there.
I think the data warehouse has to be the center of information, and all information has to eventually get into the warehouse. And the reason for that is because there's so much data in so many different places that I think it would be close to impossible to actually get a full view without having that data warehouse at the center. And even if it were possible, it would be really hard from a, Martech standpoint to make sure that all of the data successfully flows from one place to the other and vice versa without the data warehouse kind of being that central hub. And so that's kind of my viewpoint. And really the tools that are involved I think it's a two-way street, right? So it's what are the tools collecting information on the outside, right? Whether it's Amplitude for product analytics, whether it's, right, we use Common Room for understanding the behavior in our community, for Prefect, right? Those types of tools. And then how do we, right, getting that data into the warehouse, and then then merging it with other first-party data. So whether it's product usage or it's sales behavior or touch points, and then surfacing it back into either sometimes those tools to be able to kind of create that flywheel of being able to learn and create segments in something like Common Room, or more simply, it's then forwarded to something like some sort of CRM where there's a one-stop shop for, right, I'm in B2B world right now, so one-stop shop for sales reps or a marketing team or a DevRel team or something like that, to really understand, okay, what is the kind of full view of who this person is and what they've done. There's kind of a lot of pieces in that. There's two different approaches in how to get data from one place to the other. The first is just kind of dumping everything into a data warehouse and using something like dbt to transform it, to store it, right? We use Prefect for scheduling and putting all those pipelines in production, shameless plug, and then using, something like Census, for example, to write it out into your email marketing platform, into a CRM, et cetera. But there's also a second way, which is relying more on webhooks. So, for example, someone does something, it triggers a webhook into another system, and that's a little bit more, I hate this word because I think it's really loaded, but it's a little more real time, right? If you want to have not rely on a batch process that runs every few hours, but if you really want that, okay, one thing happened, now someone gets notified, that's a little bit more of a straight shot to that world. So that's kind of the two different ways I think about it. I would say the most notable thing that I kind of left out was Google Analytics, because I don't think it really has a place in this type of world, but we can kind of get a little bit more deeper into that.
Actually, I'm curious to hear your thoughts too, Daryl. I haven't used Google Analytics in over half a decade. It's been completely replaced by a couple of different tools, or usually product analytics tools that will also sit on the web domain, and Amplitude will give me data connecting on the product, but also on the website and also in the mobile apps. I know you have a bone to pick with GA, Sarah. What do you think are good use cases still today for GA, and which should be done more by product analytics instead?
Yeah, I have a secret, not so secret war against GA sometimes. And I think it's really that GA is really good at two different things. The first is, because it's a pixel on your website, right? They have things like bounce rate and all of those, that user stuff that sometimes, if not implemented properly, third-party analytics tools might not do as good of a job of. But with the caveat, if implemented properly, usually they can compete. GA also, has, it's Google, and Google kind of knows all. I am part of the problem. I have a Google Pixel. I've had the Pixel 2, the Pixel 5, the Pixel 7, right? So it's it's this ecosystem of data that Google has, whether it's from the data they have on display ads, right, on other sites, and this whole ecosystem on the internet that they can then, right, pick up different refers or pick up other information that just third-party tools that aren't as massive as Google don't have. But I do think that the question is, what is the value of that compared to the drawbacks? And I think the drawbacks are pretty huge. I think the biggest drawback is when you think about conversions. So the immediate response of someone that's used Google Analytics recently, and a lot, they would say, well, you can just send conversions to Google Analytics. And yes, you're correct about that, right? But you send conversions at a starting point moving forward. And what I mean by that is, what if at some point we want to look at website behavior and then overlay some Salesforce field based on like what outreach a sales rep did before then or something like that. And then we want to run an experiment and it's maybe a different field. We want to go look into mapping, right, just web traffic and web behavior to some first party data that we have from somewhere that maybe we're just digging and experimenting. GA takes that ability away from us a little bit by, for example, not de-anonymizing so that we can't merge directly on like who this lead is or what they all did in other systems or what it looks like down funnel. And so to me, that's a huge, huge drawback, particularly, I mean, I've worked most of my career in startups. And so particularly in startups, when digging a lot and you don't really know what you're going to find, it's really hard without knowing in advance kind of what to do. I also think that GA, like, it's really hard for people who aren't marketers to get value out of GA. And so when you have the other question to ask is like, how many quote unquote like BI like tools do you want to have within an organization, right? So you have your traditional BI tool, like a Tableau or like a Looker, et cetera, that sits on top of a data warehouse where you have all your product data, you have all your marketing data, all of this stuff. Hopefully the data team supports you, or you have an analyst like we discussed earlier. GA is kind of like a BI tool, but specific for marketing. But if you think, well, sales has their reports in Salesforce, products might have their reports in Mixpanel. But what about when like we have conversions or we have company goals that we then have to align between all of these tools to make sure that our conversions are the same and we think about them the same way. And so to me, that sprawl is very detrimental because we spend time talking about, well, you have 5 conversions on this day and I have 6. And really it's like a tracking problem. And why are we doing that 3 or 4 different times for however many flavors or, team specific basically BI tools we have?
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
Yeah, I that really resonates with me, and I also think that my theory is that Google Analytics really shines with maybe SEO on Google as well as like Google Ads, but increasingly those are becoming less effective, especially with products and services being discovered on other channels and other types of advertisements being more effective. So for example, consumer is heavily moving toward like Instagram and TikTok. And then with B2B, the search volume is just so low for, especially if you're, marketing a startup, that I almost feel like the percentage of time that you spend in Google Analytics it's not really worth it. It's not really worth the return. And, not to mention, we can go down the rabbit hole of, AI being, most of new products and services being discovered through like AI. So I think that in general, there, unless you're in a very sort of like search friendly category, you're not really going to get too far with Google Analytics, and your time would much better be spent on either like product analytics, optimizing your website, and gathering all of the data from all the different channels that people are discovering you on, and bringing that together in a data warehouse, and then onto like a data visualization tool like a Tableau or Power BI or something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your enterprise take on this, Sarah, because I resonate a lot with what Sarah said from the startup world. Like, I've been part of so many debates on like where should that conversion data live? Is it in Amplitude? Is it in Looker that's sitting on top of the warehouse? Is it okay that it's in Iterable or Customer IO, or should it be in something else? Like the sales team is fighting for Salesforce and the CRM being the source of truth, but the data team is pushing for all this work being done in Snowflake and then Redshift. Like, how does that work for you, Sarah? Like at Prefect, like being a person who's on the marketing team now, on the growth team, you get a sense of say into what is going to be that endpoint. Is it for you like the BI tool that sits on top of the warehouse? Because you just kind of said that the warehouse should be the source of truth for the whole company. So is your Tableau and your Looker sitting on top of the warehouse and it's getting product analytics data and web data and conversion event data? Like, what are you using for that use case?
Yeah, I think the question of what's the source of truth is a really important one, because I do think that kind of imposing the warehouse on everyone is also, it's going to be
Mm.
like moving mountains. And so it might be hard, right? So for example, in sales, there's a rhetoric that frankly I fully understand, right, within sales teams, which is if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. And I get it, right? If that's the tool that you're in, that's the tool that you're in. And why would you want to switch tools? You don't want that. And so the way that we've approached solving that at Prefect is making sure that we have a view of very sales specific metrics. So around, right, number of leads or pipeline or opportunities or meetings or something that's very sales focused in Salesforce, but being very, very clean and careful to be able to reproduce that within our BI tool, so that, right, if it's for like an AE or a director of sales, right, who's literally just in Salesforce, it's there. But then if we want to tie that information with broader things that we want to look into, such as how did people become leads? Like how did our website traffic influence our lead count, right? Those are questions that are made more relevant marketing and made more relevant on like outside of just one team. And it's really a funnel question. And so that's kind of how I think about what the source of truth might be.
I'm curious to ask you about personalization, because this whole, like, one of the main use cases of doing all of this work, getting most of the data in the warehouse, is getting the source of truth, like a full profile. Most people call it like 360 view of the customer. And usually like hyper personalization or personalization is like the outcome, that use case of that. What does that mean for you exactly? And like maybe walk us through examples of what you were able to accomplish at Prefect, or something that's on the roadmap, because I know you're in the process of building out that warehouse native stack. Maybe chat about that for a bit.
So with the risk of sounding too vague, I'm gonna start with something high level, and then we'll just like unpack it until we
Cool.
get to something a little more tactical. To me, personalization means reaching the right people, so who have a specific problem at the right time when they're also ready to solve this problem. And usually, right, the flavors of that are, right, about the product, and it's a bit, you could take that as something around product positioning, or right, problem aware versus solution aware, and at what, or right, in the sales sense of where are people at in their buying journey. But really, I think that every product, right, at some point, a startup starts with one very, very narrow ICP where it's just one type of person trying to solve one specific problem in one specific way. But pretty quickly that expands and it becomes 2, it becomes 3, it becomes multiple. And usually, hopefully that doesn't expand too far where you actually have an ICP, you're not just marketing to everyone, but that grows quickly with the growth of the company. And what that really translates to from a marketing perspective is being able to understand where your people are and what they're doing, who fit in this category, who are the right people, and what are the signals that they're exhibiting when it's the right time, when they're ready to kind of solve this problem that they inevitably have, right? Because that's like the crux of the company existing in the company messaging. And so at Prefect, I mentioned Common Room earlier. That's a tool that we use to really understand what are people doing out in the ecosystem. It could be with monitoring our own ecosystem, whether it's like an internal community or an external ecosystem like LinkedIn or like a third party, right, platform, in terms of we have some philosophies and theories on who the ICP is, identifying them, and then matching that with signals. But that doesn't go anywhere unless, right, just saying, here's an ICP with these signals, like that doesn't mean too much to the sales team, right? There needs to be a lot more context. And so I think that needs to be matched with how can we as a company. So we talked about developers like hating marketing. And so I think that needs to be matched as how can we as a company, right, in our outreach be helpful to that person at that time with what we know. And so that to me is what personalization means. It's about being helpful and being hyper targeted in that help, where it's not we're helping everyone the same way. Here's 5 different things, and hopefully one fits in terms of case studies or right docs or content or whatever. It's really about, hey, this might be really helpful for you, or I hope it is, or whatever, and being very hyper targeted. For Prefect, for example, one of the kind of, I think, canonical use cases is around the like ML team versus the analytics team. So just to dive into that a little bit. So Prefect, were all of our users primarily use Python or have used Python or use Python to deploy data pipelines or any sort of data related work. For analytics teams, it's usually some sort of ETL process, right? You extract data, you load data, you do something with it. It's usually warehouse native. For an ML team, it looks completely different. They have data and they're building models or training models or testing models, and the requirements around how those models get trained and how they're run on infrastructure are very, very different. You need like huge GPUs sometimes, depending on the field that you're in, right? You just have a completely different view of the world versus a data team that's actually not working in Python, for example, in Prefect's case, using mostly SQL, but needs some Python to just take their work into production and do some like random ETL processes. And those two use cases are fundamentally different. And so if someone is an ML engineer versus someone who's, right, just doing a lot more stuff in the warehouse, we're going to talk about our product a little bit differently because the problem is similar and the solution is similar, and it's still in the realm of what we're doing and what we're trying to solve as a company, but they're just 2 different personas. And I think that's really the work with product marketing to define what those personas are, how you reach out to them, but also, right, the work in growth and the work in Martech is having the tooling to identify and being able to properly segment on those personas.
Nice. I'm going to break up the next question into 2. So in my notes, I wanted to ask you that you've said the Venn diagram overlap between UX happy tools and customization happy tools is very small and non-existent. So I think the first question is, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by customization happy tools is really tools that like expose the innards of what you're doing. So I'm a really big fan of a tool called Pipedream. I take every opportunity I can to like just shout from the rooftops about it. It's basically a Zapier competitor, but I can't even put my finger on why it's better. It's just amazing. The controls that you're exposed are like, right? For example, dealing with the rate limits, if I'm trying to like enrich my CRM with like from Apollo or something is very easy because I can limit how many times a particular workflow runs within a second. And so then I can very easily say, okay, well, Apollo has a rate limit of, I don't remember what it is. Let's say 5 requests a second. It's very easy, right, to control that. However, right, with power comes responsibility. And so there it takes time to figure out how do we actually hook everything together and to test it. And you have to be a little bit deeper in the tech to be able to do that successfully versus UX tools, which I would maybe put Zapier in a little bit sometimes, right? There are probably better examples, but where you say, connect to Apollo, run this, go. And you don't need to know what that is. In that case, right, if you don't need to know what that is, it's probably a good generalization. And the UX path in that case is probably a good layer and a good abstraction over the things you probably don't really want to spend time thinking about. However, there are times when, I'll give another example, account matching in Salesforce. Sometimes you want to only match accounts that are like only consider accounts existing if they're assigned to someone that works at the company today, right? As opposed to just existing in Salesforce in general. And so a UX happy tool might not give you that flexibility and might say, do you want to match the account? Yes, no, give us the website and then we'll match it, or give us the email, domain, or whatever, and we'll match it without saying, okay, well, filter on the account existing, or having activity within the last 6 months, or being assigned to someone that works in the company or whatever, versus in the customization camp, you'd likely have a lot of those controls, but just need to know how that information is represented in Salesforce and be able to kind of know your criteria a lot better.
Interesting. So it sounds like on one hand, there's very customizable solutions that you can do, and you can build maybe a more robust setup and solve for these maybe long tail problems, and that's on one side. And on the other side, you have a very easy to use UI that can solve the problem for you, but you're not going to be able to get very far if maybe something unexpected happens. Or is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. And then, so why do you think that when we purchase Martech or we set up Martech that we're pretty optimistic about, hey, everything's going to go the way that we want, we're going to be able to solve for this solution, and how do we kind of better set our expectations? Like, do you have experience with that, and what do you think?
I think there are really two things that we need to think about. The first is, who are we optimizing for when we think about a tool? Who's going to be using it, right? Is it going to be an AE or SDR that really doesn't care about the tool at all, but just wants to set their vacation or just wants to look at some account or whatever, right? Or is it going to be someone that's one layer deeper and setting up the workflow, or really cares about account matching and all the rules and being able to granularly match accounts, right? Is that a business requirement or not? And if the answer to both is yes, then we need to be able to both appeal to this more business persona that's just trying to get the job done, and also these technical requirements. And I think we're overly optimistic about trying to do both. But what I have found time and time again, and I am generally an optimistic person, and I have gone multiple times with these very optimistic ideas about having one tool and one approach kind of fit both, but it very, very rarely does. So that is, I think, the expectation that a tool will fit both is, I think that's just an unrealistic expectation, is what I've kind of encountered time and time again. And so the way to solve for that is making sure we have the UX happy tool, right? For someone that just wants not to have a steep learning curve. They want it to be intuitive. They want to be able to update a certain setting or just view a certain report or whatever. But then having that integrate with some parallel process or some process that supports this tool to be able to add all the levers for a smaller group of people usually that are changing those settings but not exposing that to everyone because it's going to be information overload.
It's been a super fun conversation, Sarah. I love your perspective on these like growth marketing ops topics, but from a much more, like you just said, like sales folks using a tool, but there's like a layer lower of things that are like more technical, but like things that like other people care about a bit more. Like I feel like your like marketing ops folks care a bit more about certain things than your average marketer or your average salesperson. But from your data practitioner experience, like you even care more than a marketing ops person about some of these technical things because you built the data pipelines before, you've architected data teams, you've ran data teams. So your perspective on this is super, super cool. We got two last questions for you. We can't get through a podcast without chatting about ChatGPT or Gen AI stuff. We're like a few years into this like sea of content written by ChatGPT and Claude, and it's like very apparent to most when like something is written by AI. I don't know for you, but like it's shallow. It's filled with like similar words. GPT loves M dashes every couple of sentences, but it lacks personality, and most importantly, it lacks a ton of context, right? And I'm really close to this personally. We repurpose a lot of our podcast episode transcripts into blog post versions, and it's all ChatGPT driven stuff. I do a lot of editing and catching like hallucinations and bad transcriptions, but like we're not asking AI to write something from scratch about someone that became a marketer from a data engineering background. We have a conversation, and with an expert, we ask a question, and through specific prompting, we ask ChatGPT to turn that blog post, to turn that conversation into a blog post passage and have like a specific style around it. So we're giving a ton of context, and the output is way different than if I was to say like, you write me a blog post passage about Sarah becoming a marketer from her data engineering background. But this whole ramp up to the question I want to ask you is like, when it comes to writing content, specifically for your background, like creating content for a product that you're selling into developers, like you said that you struggle both with agencies, outsourcing this to agencies, but also using AI for this because neither of those are embedded in the product itself. Maybe unpack that for us. I'm really curious to get your take there.
So I think there's a fundamental question of what would you outsource? It doesn't matter whether it's to an AI tool, to a contractor, to an agency, right? And I think, right, so for example, would you outsource product marketing role? No, you wouldn't, because that role is actually, it's mostly people work. It's making sure people are aligned on your product vision, on your messaging, on your positioning, on your personas, and then building context and disseminating that across the company. And it's really an alignment role. And there's a lot of people work in that, right? But would a lot of people contract out doing like running ads? Why is that? It's because there's a lot of technical work that's very similar across different companies. And so I think there's a first question. There's two questions here. The first is, what would you contract out? Anything that you wouldn't contract out, you should be very careful using AI for, for a generative purpose, as opposed to summarization, editing, whatever, right? Like that's a little bit different. I think there's a second question, which is how, like, if you go down the path of using AI, right? How should you interact with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, right? And this phrasing I'm about to say actually came from our CEO, Jeremiah, who's really into the AI space and very bullish on AI, rightfully so, and I agree with him. And the way that he phrased it made so much sense to me. And it was, think about an LLM as an intern. Would you give an intern at a company, right, like the 19-year-old who's like transitioning from a freshman to sophomore year in college, a really open-ended question where they're supposed to be creative about and have all this context that someone who's 20 years their senior has on the space? No, you wouldn't. And then furthermore, even if you give them a well-scoped task, would you give that output to your CEO without reviewing it first? No, of course you wouldn't. And so that, I think, is the approach that we need to take with AI right now, where it's not good enough to be like a staff marketer, right? But it is good enough to take some context and do some manipulation, right? And put it in different formats, and then have someone senior with the context edit it. And it's still a lot faster because it's a lot easier to do something when you're not starting from zero. It's like you're not saying, paint me a painting. You're saying, here's a stencil, right? Fill it in, which is a very, very different, which is a very different problem and a very different approach. Is a lot more feasible for where AI is today. There are two caveats. The first is, like technology is changing so quickly, so I don't think that this is always how it's going to be. But I also think that there's right, and then there's the second caveat, which is it all depends on how you set it up. So I personally really like Claude for setting up context, where you can add, right? So for example, like I can add a bunch of blog posts, or I can add a bunch of LinkedIn posts, right? Add our company positioning, and you start to build that context. And so you just get to that point a lot faster of building context, but we're still not quite fully there yet. So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, I had this insight and before, have you about Gen AI and its use. Have you both seen the movie Limitless by chance?
I have not.
Phil has. Okay, so
is that the one where they have like a watch for like how long they have left in their life?
No, so Limitless is about a pill that you take, and it increases your intelligence like several magnitudes.
Okay.
It's with Bradley Cooper. Anyway, in the movie, the core one of the key insights is the pill works better if you're already smart. Like it makes like an average person pretty good, but it makes a really smart person genius level. And I feel like that very much, in my opinion, applies to AI. I think that if you have a good strategy, if you're thinking about your customers the right way, if you have a good product offering, and you're approaching customer engagement and messaging the right way, it can get you really far. But for most people, they don't have that. So AI will just help them write their content a little faster or generate the reports a little bit faster. It doesn't take you where you want to go. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that. And I'll now move to the last question.
Yeah, you get the honor of this is the first time you get to ask that question, Daryl.
I do. I am honored. Okay, so we asked this of all our guests. Sarah, you're a marketing leader, a data practitioner, a newsletter author, conference speaker, and also a renowned TV show binger. Yeah, me too. Ski expert, avid swimmer. So our question is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all things what you're working on while staying happy?
Balance, I think, is really the key to life. And so for me, my job is in front of a computer and I'm inside all of the time. So I try to balance that by going outside whenever I can. So we're recording this right in winter. I ski a lot. It's about to be my life and basically all of my life outside of work for the next 5 months, which I'm very excited about. In the summer, I live in Vermont, and so there's skiing. And we're right on a lake, and so do paddleboarding, try to get out on the water. But really, it's just trying to get that change of scenery, just trying to get the blood flowing, and just getting a little bit of adrenaline in there too.
Love it. Awesome answer. I think we're all TV show bingers, but yeah, it's a good balance to go outside because you spend the day on your laptop, and then like you spend part of your evening in front of the TV watching a show. And my wife is also always like, yeah, having a dog is good for that. Like even in the winter, I'm just like, oh man, we didn't walk you today yet. Like let's go. And it's always a drag, but then you're outside and you're breathing the fresh air and you're like, man, like I need to do this more often. I'm in front of a screen way too much.
Yeah, the fresh air it really just like changes your whole perspective.
Definitely. We'll link out to your newsletter, Sarah. I think there's some awesome articles in there. There's a bunch of topics we didn't get to cover. We could have done like 3 or 4 more parts. But yeah, thank you for all the stuff you're writing about. I think you're doing a service and helping bridge that gap between growth marketers and all the data engineering concepts out there. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks, Daryl.